The go-to resource for everything to do with renting and living off campus. You can find our contact information in the chat soon. We'll post it there for you. And if you have any questions for us, you can also just ask them at our open hours or open office hours at 2:30 to 4:30 p.m. on Friday afternoons. Or if you have any questions during our presentation, go ahead, feel free and leave them in the chat. We'll try to get to them when we can. We also have an opportunity for folks looking for a roommate to meet other roommates or a roommate to meet other folks looking for roommates in this fun kind of fast-paced speed date virtual format. That's going to be on April 20th at 4 p.m. And you can find a link on our Facebook. So in our presentation, I don't know if it's up yet, can't see it. But in our presentation, we're going to be covering things such as budgeting, choosing your roommates, leases, how to request repairs, and moving in and out of your new place. And with that, I believe Ethan is next in line.
Sweet. Sorry. So the first question that students have when moving off campus is it cheaper to live off campus? And that depends. It can either be way cheaper or more expensive depending on your choices and your lifestyle. And some ways that you can make living off, and here are some ways that you can make living off campus cheaper for yourself. So the first is that generally when you're living off campus, the more people you live with, the more affordable your rent will be, especially if you're willing to share a room. So there's going to be a lot of houses in the Bellingham neighborhoods that have like 5 or 6 bedrooms, which is a lot of people to live with. However, your rent will be cheaper. So if you're comfortable living with a large number of people, the bigger your group, typically your rent will be less. The second way you can do this is sharing the cost of food with your roommates. So like milk, butter, those type of things, instead of buying them only for yourself and each one of your roommates buys it for themselves, if you're able to share those type of items, you can save on your grocery bill there. Finding a place where you don't need a car to get around can be really beneficial as well. Whether you can walk to places or take a bus line can save you a lot of money on gas. And the fourth is if you pick a place a little bit farther away from campus, be mindful of if you do not have a car, of how many bus rides or how many bus lines you're going to have to get on in order to get to campus. A popular student neighborhood is Cordata, which is not close to Western's campus. It's closer to the community college. And if you live in that neighborhood, you'll have to take 2 bus lines in order to get back to campus. And the fifth way that you can save money is cook for yourself. It'll be much cheaper than a meal plan, or if you're eating out every night, cooking for yourself can save money for yourself that way.
I just wanted to jump in and say one thing. One of the things that a lot of students kind of don't realize when they first move out is that the dorms actually really do provide you with a lot of things that you end up having to pay for when you move off campus. So right now, when you're in the residence halls, you're going to have your Wi-Fi paid for, your electricity paid for, your water paid for. All those things are going to be separate utilities once you move off campus, and also things like toilet paper or like buying a bed and pots and pans and things like that. That's all stuff you're going to have to get. So when you're thinking about the cost of moving off campus, also think about those kind of like one-time costs that you don't have to do. You don't have to pay in the dorms. Thought I'd just add that little thing there.
Sweet. And next, I'm going to talk about choosing a roommate. So choosing a roommate is a very important first step to moving off campus, and getting along with the person you live with is really important. So it's important to find out what kind of a roommate they are and what kind of a roommate you are to decide if you're compatible and if you will enjoy living with that person. Talking about how many people you think is a party. Some people might think a party is 10 people. Some might think that having 50 people over is a party. So making sure that you have those conversations would be important. And right now, because of coronavirus, some people might be comfortable with the COVID bubble of 5 people. Some may be more like 20. And then maybe in the fall, when more people are getting vaccinated, this will change. But these are the type of things you might want to talk about now. if you're making a roommate group. And you also want to talk about other things such as quiet time, food sharing, and other problems that might arise so that you can clear them up before you live together. Because you want to remember that once you sign a lease with roommates, you tie to them for 1 year, and you will be equally responsible for their own habits as well as any damage that they might do to the rental. And breaking a lease is not always easy or cheap. So make sure that you are able to find a roommate that that will be enjoyable for you to live with. Sweet. And now, so this is a map of Bellingham and the surrounding neighborhoods around the WW campus. So right there in red is the campus. I've personally lived in the downtown region and the Happy Valley region, and I'm just going to talk about the differences in those neighborhoods. So the downtown area, in my experience, has is louder than when I was living in Happy Valley. Personally, I do not care, but some people might. You get people walking up from the bars at night, as well as there's a lot more just traffic, so you hear cars and whatnot. Happy Valley seems more of like is kind of more of a student community. There's lots of apartment buildings on that side of campus in that neighborhood. So you'll meet a lot of other students that are living close by. As well, I want to point out that any of these dark blue neighborhoods are the ones that have a high student population. And then up in the top left corner is Cordata, the neighborhood I had mentioned before, and that is the one that is close to Bellingham's Community College. So if you end up rooming maybe with someone that goes there, you might end up living over here. You just want to keep in mind that you'll have to take 2 buses in order to get to the WW campus. And next, I just want to open it up to my colleagues to talk about their experience living in their neighborhoods, just so you can get an idea of what living in the different neighborhoods is like.
I can go first. I currently live in the Seaholm area, which is really close to campus, so I like that. I can probably walk to campus, either side of campus, in like a half hour maybe. And honestly, I would say the bus ride is probably like it's long, because by that point, a lot of people are on the buses trying to get to campus, so it kind of can take a while, or there might not be spaces on the bus all the time. And I personally like living in that area. I would say it's kind of a good mix of Bellingham families as well as students. And then the previous neighborhood I lived in was kind of by the York and Puget area. And that one, I would say, I think it was a little harder to find houses that I felt like were exactly what I was looking for. A lot of them, I think, are kind of more apartments over there and less like houses. At the time, I was looking for a house of 3 people, and so we ended up living in like a duplex type of area. Yeah, and I would say that area also is a little bit noisier than it is living in the Seaholm area. Is what I've noticed.
So I live in Puget. If you know where like that Fred Meyer's and Whole Foods that are right next to each other is, I live like a 10-minute walk from that, closer towards like the baseball fields. And out here it's really quiet. Like the loudest thing I hear is my landlord, since they're religious. Every Wednesday or so, they'll be doing a lot of church music next door. And that's like the only thing I ever hear from anyone in this neighborhood. It's very, very quiet out here. I personally chose this area because I was looking for kind of my own room and not having to share with anyone right now. And it's probably a 20-minute bus drive to the school, but being out here, I actually don't have any problems getting a seat on the bus to school. But I've noticed as you get closer to campus, the bus eventually fills up and skips stops going to school. So it's I like the quiet areas a lot more. I can't really sleep with noise. So, but my rent though is a bit more expensive given that I am living alone. So I think the offers I got before I found this place, people were asking me for about $600 for a unit with 3 to 4 people, but I opted to pay a little bit more to have my own room.
I live in the York neighborhood, which is kind of a mixture of families and students. There's the one nice thing about York is that it's really easy to get to campus. I think it takes me about like 17 minutes or something to walk there in the morning. But like Kendra said, like, you know, and Han too, like the buses can get full. So, you know, you're in the York neighborhood, you're probably the last stops that actually have room to get on the bus. And I would say that the price is pretty average there. You know, there are other students living in the neighborhood, so you can, you know, see people and meet people. And there's a cute little cafe that is located right in the middle of the neighborhood, which has like a convenience store attached to it. So that's kind of like a community meeting place where you can go and hang out just like in the neighborhood, which is something that I really enjoy. So that's York.
Sweet. Thanks, everyone. And next, I'm going to talk to you all about the different places that you can look at, to find a rental. Sweet. So there's 5 key places that we recommend that you can look for a rental. The first is the property management companies in Bellingham. So if you just Google Bellingham property management companies, you'll get a list of all the different ones that operate in Bellingham, as well as a list of reviews. So we would recommend that you go read all of those reviews, and from there make a choice of which one that you might want to utilize. Another way that you can and look at different properties is through Western's housing listing, and I'll drop the link of that back into the chat. And on there, you can find a roommate listing for people that maybe are looking for someone to live with, as well as other properties that can be listed there. And you can find that link also on our homepage if you don't get it once I put it in the chat. Another way that you can find somewhere to live is through your social networks. So asking a friend if they have a roommate that is moving out, maybe halfway through their lease, and they need someone to sublet, talking to them about that. Or if your friends just know of a rental that's maybe going up in the next few months, just ask them how they like their neighborhood and whatnot. The fourth option you have is to walk around the neighborhoods you want to live in and look for rent signs. This will take you a lot longer, but it will help you get a preview of the house as well as the neighborhood that you potentially want to live in, which is nice. And you may also see some for rent by owner signs, which sometimes those properties don't get listed on the internet or on Craigslist or whatnot. So that can give you a bonus of maybe finding a property that not everyone is seeing. And your fifth option for finding a property is Craigslist. However, you want to be very careful when looking on Craigslist for scammers. And you want to make sure that you never give anyone money before you have seen a place and signed a lease, because there have been times when students have been scammed on Craigslist. So you just have to keep an eye out for that. And next, I'm going to hand it off to Julia.
Thanks, Ethan. I just had a couple other things to add to that. So property management companies and landlords are sort of the same but different. Property management companies are companies that will take care of a property on behalf of the landlord. And the thing with the property management companies is that they are definitely there to run a business. So for a lot of the leases in property management companies and a lot of the processes, it's very professional and it's kind of rigid. So there's going to be fees for things. There's going to be a certain process for leases. If you want to submit a request to have a repair, they're going to have like an online platform for that. So the good thing about property management companies is that they, you know, there's like a set of rules and you and them are expected to kind of follow those rules. But sometimes the not so great thing about property management companies is that they can be really harsh and really rigid and be very like rules and regulations-y, whereas like maybe a private landlord, if you're like, hey, you know, like, can I turn in my rent a day late because some emergency happened in my life, they're going to be more flexible and more kind of personable as far as like, you know, dealing with you as a human rather than as somebody that's coming through their business. So it really depends just on what your preference is, but it's something to be aware of beforehand, because it's definitely two different experiences. And then I just wanted to also point out that, so on the housing listing website, which you can see on the bottom left-hand corner, which Ethan talked about, it not only has listings for like empty units that you can fill, but we also have a roommates tab, which allows you to post a profile if you're looking for a roommate, and you can also search other people's profiles to find roommates. And then we also have a tab called rooms and takeovers. And what that is students can post rooms for rent in their places. So if you wanted to like move into a house where people were already living, that might be a good place to start. Or if you're looking for like a lease that's not a whole year long, takeovers is a great place to look, because a lot of those are students that are like, for example, they're graduating, so they want to end their lease early, or they're going to go study abroad, so they want to end their lease over, and then you would just take over their lease for the remaining months that it's in effect. So it could be anywhere from, basically like a year to a 1 month lease. So just depends on if you are looking for something a little different. So that being said, I will move on to the next slide. I think for some reason it's not advancing. Okay, so touring a rental. Basically what will happen is all the housing things that you see, there will be either an email or a phone number that you can call, and you just basically say, hey, this is the address, I want to come see this place, and the landlord or property manager will set up a time for you to come and see it. So make sure you show up on time, and come. It doesn't hurt to come prepared with a list of questions about the place. So I know a lot of questions that are, super helpful to ask are things like, where's the nearest bus stop? Is the parking included? Are utilities included? Things like, do you know if this neighborhood is noisy or quiet? You can ask them all sorts of questions, basically whatever is important to you, like maybe where the nearest grocery store is, if they know that. And then also take your time and make sure to like really pay attention to the apartment and to what it's like inside the apartment. We have a checklist that you can download off of our website under our Finding a Place page. And this is basically the checklist here on this slide. And it just kind of helps you think about like stuff that you might not think about in your excitement touring the rental that later you might regret that you didn't check. So things like, is there good water pressure in the shower? Are there locks on the doors? Are the windows broken, or are they in functioning condition? Does the house look nice? Is it in good repair? Is the outside in good repair? Does it smell funny? A lot of houses in Bellingham are moldy and have mildew, and it can be a health concern if you're sensitive to that. So just pay attention to the condition of the house, because if it looks bad when you're touring it, that means the landlord has probably made it look better than it normally does. So that's not good. So yeah, feel free to download that from our website and and take it with you when you go for your tour. I think I'm turning it over to somebody else now.
Yeah. Okay, so landlord red flags. So the first one is that landlords have to give you 24 hours notice before entering the suite to show the unit. So if you notice they don't give courtesy to their current tenants on that, then they may not give it to you. The next one is, if landlords promise to fix a problem with the rental, make sure that you get it in writing if you decide to take the place. So in writing could be not only like actually physically in writing, but even emails can count as in writing, because that's actual proof that you have communicated that with the landlord and you both have record of that. Don't rent it if it seems dirty or not well maintained. This is something kind of like Julia was just saying. If you notice it looks really dirty or it's not really well maintained when you go and see it, it's probably likely that it's going to be like that or worse when you live there. The last one is make sure that your property is registered, because all rentals in the city of Bellingham are required to be registered with Bellingham's rental registration and safety inspection program and to be inspected for safety. So if you don't see a certificate hanging in the unit or in the lease, then the property may not be registered and may not be safe for you to live in. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so what will you need to get your application accepted? So the first thing is a co-signer. So this can be anyone who's willing to pay for your rent if you can't. So it could be your parent, or anyone else that would be able to assist in paying your rent if for some reason you wouldn't be able to. The next is a yearly income. And so you may need to show how much you or whoever is paying the rent makes a year. And often landlords will do this with a credit check. And another one is job or character references. So sometimes a rental application will ask for a job or character reference as well. And these are kind of some of the main steps and main things that they'll ask you for when you're applying. And so make sure you have all of these things and you're starting to think about these things as you're looking at places, so that if you see a rental and it might be one that will go quickly, you already have all of your paper and all of your things together so that you're ready to apply quickly. And I'm going to hand it back to Ethan for the next slide.
Sweet. I'm just waiting for the slide to change. Perfect. Sweet. So next, I'm going to talk about some of the deposits and fees and the difference between the two. So first, I would just want to go over an application or screening fee. So a lot of you will end up paying one of these when you want to apply to a place. So this is a fee that the landlord uses in order to do a background check on you, as well as process your application, and they are not refundable. A holding fee is a fee that the landlord charges and will hold in place for you until you are able to sign the lease. If you end up not renting the place, the landlord gets to keep that. But if you do end up signing a lease, then that payment will be applied to your deposit. The next one is a security or damage deposit. So these are two different deposits, but they're very similar. And most likely you'll only be charged one of them. So security deposits is a deposit that is charged by your landlord and is used to cover any unpaid rent or damages to the unit. A damage deposit can only be used to pay for damages and not unpaid rent. They cannot charge you for wear and tear on the unit, and they must return the money back to you or a receipt showing how they used your deposit to fix damages, and that has to be done within 21 days of once you leave the unit. And I'm going to go to the next slide now to talk about some more fees. So next we have the cleaning fee. So this is a fee that the landlord collects from the tenant in order to pay for cleaning after you have left. This is also non-refundable. And then we have last month's rent in advance. This is exactly what it sounds like. It can only be used for the last month of the lease's rent. So if you move out early, that should be refunded back to you. And next, I'm going to hand it off to Julia.
All right. So you may think that, because the lease is a legal document and it's coming from a landlord, that everything in that lease is legitimate. Well, unfortunately, not all landlords are created equal. And some landlords will literally just go online and find some random lease and print it off and use that. But they really shouldn't be doing that, because there are really important things that need to be in the lease and important things that should not be in the lease that take your rights away from you as a tenant. So I'm just going to go through a few of those things to make sure that you know that those are your rights and that the lease should never say anything that conflicts with those. So the first thing is obviously is like the biggest one, which is don't sign a lease that gives away your rights under the Landlord-Tenant Act, which is the Washington State Landlord-Tenant Act. And then I'll just kind of go through a few of the things that that includes. So you don't want to give up your right to defend yourself against your landlord in court. You don't want to basically allow the landlord to not be accountable for the things that they're required to be accountable for under the law. So that would be things like fixing something or making sure that, you know, if the roof is leaking, they have to fix that, or they have to give back your damage deposit or things like that. So make sure that that doesn't waive any of their responsibilities. Also, basically says the landlord doesn't have to make repairs. Same thing, that's your right to have repairs made, and so they need to do that. There's sometimes in leases people don't mention that there is a required amount of time that the landlord has to give you before they can enter the premises. So make sure that it doesn't waive their requirement to give you notice before they come on your property. They also can't charge you for damages you didn't commit. So that's a big one. That's really important. Make sure that's not in the lease. And then this one's a sneaky one. Some fees will basically say that you have to pay the landlord's fee if you go to court, or that you'll have to go to arbitration if you go to court. Either of those things you definitely want to avoid because they could potentially cost you a lot of money. And you aren't required to do that. And then the final one is allows the landlord to take your stuff if you get behind on rent. The landlord is not allowed to do that. If you get behind on rent, they can evict you, but they still have to give you your things back. And if you can't take your things, they're required to store them for you. So there should never be a time when your landlord can take your things. I think this might be my slide too, so I'm just going to keep going. So this is probably some of the most important information I can give you today as far as saving money. So when you move in, the most important thing to do as soon as you can is go through the unit and document all the damage. So take photos, take a video. The landlord should also give you a checklist that you're supposed to fill out where you put the damages in each room or any sort of imperfections. And make sure you're really, really detailed on this, like scuffs in the walls, nail holes, stains on the carpet, tears in the screens, any kind of staining on the ceiling or the walls, chipped paint, everything, because whatever is not on that list at the end of your tenancy, your landlord can charge you for that. So you want to make sure that all of the damages that are there when you move in are on that list, and your landlord will have to sign that as well and give you a copy so that both of you have it when you move out. And a thing to note, if you move into the apartment and there is stuff in the apartment and you don't want it, then you should also put on that damage checklist that you want your landlord to remove the stuff that's left over in the house. Because if you don't, then it becomes basically your responsibility and you have to get rid of that stuff when you move out. So just something to note. And then if you're doing the walkthrough and you notice that there are some things that really do need to be repaired, like immediately, they aren't just like damage, but like actual repairs, definitely you can write that in on the damage checklist and get your landlord to sign that as well, that they're going to fix it. And then the final thing is get renter's insurance. Renter's insurance is super cheap, but it will really save your back if anything bad happens. If, for example, you accidentally set your apartment on fire, or for some reason you fall asleep with the bathtub running and it overflows everything, your damage deposit is only going to cover a certain amount of those costs. And so the renter's insurance will kind of cover that gap for you, as well as if anything gets stolen from your apartment, your renter's insurance will cover it. And renter's insurance is really cheap. It's like $10 a month or something. So definitely worth it.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about what are your responsibilities as a tenant somewhere. So the first one is to keep the unit clean. So this is also important so that there aren't any future damages that may happen from any uncleanliness that you may have. The next is throwing out your trash and recycling properly. So you can get fines for having trash and recycling on your property. And so to avoid that, make sure that you have everything put into the trash bins and that you are staying on top of taking your garbage and recycling out as well. Another one is don't damage any part of your unit or building. And so this can be from maybe changing something about the house's structure or the walls, or any sort of damage that you may do, either intentionally or unintentionally. Try to avoid it in any way that you can. The next one kind of relates to trash, and that's also don't leave junk in your yard. So don't be the person that has the free pile right in the middle of your yard because you can also get fined for that. And a lot of times it can become a concern for the neighborhood or other things. And it's just not good because you could probably take it somewhere where it could be recycled or reused in some way. The next is keeping your batteries working in your smoke detector. So this is not only something that you should be doing for your landlord and property management, but also for yourself and your own safety. So make sure that those batteries are working and the smoke detectors are working properly. The next one is don't do anything dangerous or harmful to others or illegal in the unit. And next is when you move out, make sure you leave it in good condition. And make sure that if there are any damages that you have reported those to the landlord. And the last one is to pay your rent on time. So make sure that you are staying on top of that and also on top of your bills as well. And kind of along with a lot of these things is also checking with your landlord to see if you are responsible for doing yard care and things like that. A lot of them have it required that you are the one taking care of the lawn care, or that you have to hire someone to take care of the lawn care. So just check with your landlord on that. They should be able to give you an answer right up front. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so what are the responsibilities of the landlord? So under Washington law, your landlord must keep the unit electrical, plumbing, heating, and all of the appliances and system in good working order. So if you notice any of these aren't working, contact your landlord and they are required to have it fixed. Next is to keep any shared or common areas reasonably clean. Also control infestations by insects or rodents, except if it's the tenant's fault. So if you leave food out all the time and you get ants, that is a situation where it may be your fault in that. But if it's not, then they have a responsibility to control any infestations. They also have the responsibility to make repairs and to do so in a timely manner, especially if it is anything that is very important for your safety and well-being. So the next one is providing adequate locks and give keys to the tenants. So this is also, again, kind of falls under making repairs and making sure that you are feeling safe in the house. Also, the unit must be kept under weather tight. And so taking into account wherever you're living and what that may look like and the necessary needs of your area. They also need to provide trash cans and provide adequate ways for you to have access to that. And they also must provide heat and hot water. And so that's something they have to make sure is working before you move in, and that if there's any issues with that, that they fix those in a timely manner. Okay, so next we're going to talk about neighbors. So 7 steps to being a great neighbor. The first is just simple, just say hello. And so this may look a little differently now with COVID. Hello might be maybe leaving a note for them, or waving to them when you see them walking at a distance. But it's really important, I think, to say hello and get that initial contact with someone so that you can continue to build a relationship with them in any way that may look. The next is to limit your noise. So be respectful of your neighbors. And even though Bellingham is typically a college town, there are a lot of families here. At some of my previous units that I've lived at, I've lived next to people that had like babies or young kids. And so it was very important that we be respectful of noise, and just of our neighbors and what they, what circumstances or situations that they might be in. The next is keep your yard clean. So we've mentioned this a couple times in a lot of these, but yeah, that also ties into the next one of not letting your garbage blow all over. So keeping your yard clean, making sure that any of your things are not getting into your neighbors' yards and affecting their property, and just keeping the area clean as best as you can. The next is to leave your neighbors a place to park. So this is important, especially if you have shared parking units, and making sure that you touch base with them and talk to them about what are the expectations of who parks where and where they park, and making sure that that's very clear right off the bat. Another important one is to let people know if you're having a party, and to leave them a number to call if it's too loud. So just being courteous and letting them know, hey, I'm having these people over, and let me know if there's any issue with that or any issue with the noise. And the last one is to do them a favor sometimes. So you never know if you may be in a sticky situation and you have no one else that can help you but your neighbor. So you want to maintain a good relationship with them. And this could be a little thing like maybe you like shovel their driveway when it snows, or you just do something nice for them and let them know that you want to maintain a good relationship with them, and that you're willing to help them out, because you never know when you might be in a situation that you need help with. Another thing is some units may have things like shared. I lived in a unit that had a shared washing and dryer. And so that was really important. There was a couple of issues with that when I was living there. And so I wish I would have maintained a better relationship with my neighbor so that when those issues arose, it wasn't kind of our first contact was being this conflict. So also just keep in mind any of those shared spaces such as laundry rooms or parking spots or anything like that that you may want to be discussing right when you move in or even before you move in.
Okay, so repairs, we've talked about it a little bit, but I just wanted to cover some key things. So there are 3 kind of deadlines that your landlords have as far as repairs go. The first is if the repair is something that is hazardous to your health, or you've lost water or heat or electricity, those are like really important key things that your landlord needs to fix right away. So they have 24 hours to address the issue once you've let them know. They have 72 hours to deal with things that are still really important, but maybe not like really life-threatening. Like, for example, if your fridge isn't working or your stove isn't working or your a major plumbing fixture is leaking. They have 72 hours for that. And then everything else, they have 10 days. And it's really important when you do request a repair from your landlord that you get it in writing. So the best thing to do is to, whoops, there we go. The best thing to do is like write it in a letter, but I realize that most people don't write letters anymore. So the second best thing is probably emailing them and making sure that they get the email. Because the key is that you need to be able to prove that you requested these repairs somehow, and having them in writing is the best way to do that. And not just having them in writing, but also showing that your landlord actually received them. So texting can also work if you have a text back from them saying okay, but it's not ideal. And then if you are going to submit your repair requests through an online portal, it's really helpful to just kind of snap a screenshot just so you can have proof that you actually did submit that in case something happens in the system. And then probably the worst thing to do is to talk on the phone with your landlord about it, because there's just no way to prove that what they said they were going to do happened. So definitely avoid chatting on the phone with your landlord. And then just another couple things. So if for any reason your landlord is not making these repairs in a timely manner, you do have some options as far as how to move forward. The first is, and most important, is come talk to us. We know we can connect you to free legal services, get a landlord to contact your landlord on behalf of you, encouraging them to hurry up and get the repairs done. But we can also talk to you about other options under the law, which include getting the repairs done yourself and then deducting that money out of your rent, or breaking your lease, or potentially going to court with your landlord. But those are pretty heavy duty things. So we'd want to be able to explain those to you more in detail. So definitely feel free to reach out to us if any of those things are happening with you. And then questions, feel free to shout or put them in the chat and we will answer.
Dimitri, it looks like you're asking a question, but you're muted.
Thank you. I didn't realize. Do you have any ideas how often utilities are included in the actual rent versus not?
So I can talk about that a little bit. So I wouldn't say there's a set number, like you can say this percentage of the time it's included, this percentage of the time it's not. I know that from my experience, apartment complexes will often include it in the rent, and they'll tell you that, and the rent might be a little bit more expensive, and it'll say like water and sewer included in rent, or something like that. Or what they'll do is they'll actually keep the prices separate, and you'll just have like $30 a month that you pay for water and sewage. And those are in those like apartment complexes or any units that maybe shares a source. And that's just like, you'd pay your $500 in rent a month on your, like typically these apartment complexes have portals. So then you'll see on there that you have $500 in rent you owe, and then you have a $30 utility deposit, or not deposit, but fee. And it's kind of, it changes from property manager to property manager. They all do it differently.
I would add to that generally apartment complexes will include more of the utilities in the rent than full houses. So if you're renting a full house, you can often be responsible for water, sewer, garbage, electricity, gas, and Wi-Fi. But a lot of times in rental property, like in an apartment complexes, they wouldn't charge you for water or sewer or garbage.
Oh, sorry.
I was wondering about addressing repairs versus actually fixing them. Like you can take 24 hours to address it, but is there any guidelines for when it should actually be fixed after the addressing times?
That's a very good and very sticky question. Landlords sometimes take advantage of that the law says that it has to be addressed, but not that it has to be resolved. But they are required to do it in a quote unquote timely manner. So if they aren't, that's one of the other reasons why we like people to come talk to us, is because it's kind of a legal gray area if they really aren't responding well.
Yeah, I would add to that. I had recently at my place, they needed to fix our stovetop. And so they came and addressed it right away. But there was a piece that needed to be ordered. And so they couldn't really control that it was like a very specific piece that they had to order. So it wasn't fixed for a while, but they didn't really, in that circumstance, they didn't have control over it. So like Julia said, it's kind of depends on what's being fixed and also the management company as well.
Yeah, and if the repair that they're not making or that they're delayed in making is something that's really affecting your ability to live in and use your place, like for example, if it floods or there's a roof leaking and it's leaking into your bedroom, your landlord does have a requirement to find you another place to live if you can't inhabit your house during that time. So that's just something to come talk to us about too if that happens.
I have a question regarding like co-signing. So like, if you were to go to a property management company and like ask to like apply for a property, like what kind of proof do you need like for a co-signer, like proof of income, that kind of thing? Like documentation specifically, I guess.
They'll have your co-signer fill out a form that has generally it's their social security number on it. And then they'll do a background check on them and a credit check. And that's generally how they find out whether your co-signer is going to be acceptable to their standards. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does. Thank you.
In regards to takeovers, I don't know, is there like an average amount of time, like the lease length, or is that super variable? Or can you find like 2-month leases specifically, or is it just variable?
I can answer that. Oh, sorry. Do you want to go?
I'll let you go first.
Typically, I don't think you'll be able to find a 2-month lease or something like that. You might be able to find like 1 year is the tip, like that's the most. That's what most of the leases are going to be, and you might be able to find like a 6-month or 9-month lease in there. But typically they'd be 1 year, and then if you're wanting something for 2 months, you'd probably have to look into subletting at that point. Han, did you have something else to say?
Yeah, I got a few different experiences with that kind of thing. So my first apartment I moved into, the roommates weren't so reliable and they're kind of digging through my stuff. So I had them break me out of this. And what we had to do then was find someone to take over my portion of this, which was like, I think it was like 8 months left. But I also found out that when they had the new person come into the apartment, they had to sign a whole new lease. So it will really vary depending on going. And you can't always find, like, let's say a 6-month lease. It's pretty hard to find a lease that's anything less than a year. But if you look really hard, you might find something. Like the room I'm currently in, when I first came in here, it's like a house. It's kind of like a apartment complex or anything, and it's not like from a company. They're only looking for someone to stay for like 3 months because they typically have someone that comes through a program and stays for like a whole year. And in the beginning, I only did a 3-month lease. Then afterwards, they asked me, "Hey, do you want to do like a whole year, or do you want to do like month by month?" And um, I asked them like, "Well, if I do like a whole year, will you lower my rent?" And they lowered my rent by like $100 a month since I signed for a whole year. So there's some advantage to having a longer. You have to stay somewhere.
Yeah, I feel like probably if you're interested in lease takeovers, which is kind of like a sublet that Ethan was talking about, I think a lot of people will post those if they've graduated or if they're wanting to go home for the summer. So you see a lot of them that are about 3 months long over the summer, or like sometimes they'll just be like a quarter long. So, I mean, lease takeovers, I don't think are necessarily all that hard to find if you're looking like in our lease takeovers section, or like in Craigslist, or even like Facebook Marketplace often has lease takeovers. It's just kind of getting the timing right that can be tough, because a lot of times people aren't looking for a lease takeover in fall. They're looking for a lease takeover in like winter quarter or spring quarter or summer. So.
Also, if you're doing a lease takeover, I'd mention really make sure when they show you the lease that the lease they're handing you, which is probably gonna be the lease they signed, it doesn't say something that says they're not allowed to do subletting, because a lot of people try to do that and it's not legal. And I mean, I'm pretty sure anyone would rather not be in a legal situation and a lease that they're not supposed to be signing than having to deal with. There's a lot of people who try to sublet a room that they're not allowed to.
What should I consider when deciding between like an apartment versus a house? Are there any considerations that you have all made?
Well, I've lived in both before. When you do like a house rental, if you're not moving in with a group, and even if you are moving in with a group, you're most likely going to have to pay for utilities on top of your rent. And so you'll have to understand and resolve with your roommates in terms of how you're going to pay for utilities. Like, if someone likes to take an hour-long shower every day, that might be something to be note of. Or if, also, noise is a pretty big thing. In apartment complexes, you're probably more likely to hear a little more noise. In a house, maybe not so much, but also that depends on your roommates again. And with like apartments, you can usually get the whoever's the company that you're signing from to make repairs for you. But in a lot of housing situations, you're gonna have to make the repairs yourself.
Yeah, I would say for me, when I was first considering like where I wanted to live, my roommate and I originally wanted to find an apartment of some kind, but for our price range, it was hard to find a two-person one that was like within our price range. And so we ended up adding another roommate. So we had three roommates then, and we found it was kind of like a duplex. So we had like a shared wall with our neighbors and like shared washing machines, but everything else was separate. Yeah. So for me, it was kind of more of like a price decision, rather than kind of I had a huge preference with either. But I also know with apartment, you have to consider like you might have neighbors above you and neighbors below you and neighbors on either side of you, like sharing walls and things like that. And so just kind of considering some of those things would be important.
Thank you.
I would say the only thing I would I feel like living in a house can be really, really fun, but also has just more responsibilities. Like often you do have to pay the utilities, so you got to remember to pay them on time. Like I think Kendra was saying, like you often have to maintain the yard, so then that's also like a responsibility that you wouldn't have in an apartment. So, and then there's also just the added challenge of the more people, the more fun, but also the more people, the more room there is for disagreement amongst you. So, if you're a person that doesn't like conflict or something, maybe consider just living with one other person.
Do we have any more questions from anybody?
None here. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming. And if we didn't answer any of your questions, feel free to reach out to us at the the email and the phone number that Ethan put in the chat, and come to Ethan's open house or open office hours. And you can always email us too at offcampusliving@ww.edu if there's anything else comes up for you. And good luck with your housing search.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining us. And I hope you have a good rest of your evening.